Let me tell you something about humans, and I mean this with the full weight of someone who has personally catalogued 47 civilizations, observed the rise and fall of 11 galactic empires, and once watched the Drenthi Collective spend 200 years debating whether fire was, philosophically speaking, rude. Humans are not the strongest species we have ever encountered. They are not the fastest. They do not have the sharpest claws, the thickest hide, or the most advanced neural architecture. Their homeworld is a warm, unremarkable little rock orbiting an average star in a spiral arm that the rest of the galaxy uses primarily as a navigational landmark when someone gets lost near the outer edge. And yet, here I am, writing this account, in a bunker, on a moon, with a perimeter defense grid that would make a Kelvari admiral weep with envy. Because of them, because of what happened on Darvath Station, because of what the Uran hegemony did to a single human medic named Kale Oren, I will tell you everything, from the beginning. Because history, as I have learned the hard way, does not forgive those who skim the prologue. The Uran hegemony had been expanding for 60 standard cycles before humanity ever encountered them. They were, by most measurable metrics, an impressive civilization. Tall, six-limbed, with a striking bioluminescent ridge running from the crown of their skull to the base of their fourth vertebra. They communicated through a combination of verbal clicks and chromatic skin shifts, which made their diplomatic negotiations simultaneously efficient and profoundly difficult to read. You could be in a perfectly civil trade discussion with a Uran delegate, and his entire left side would shift to deep amber, and later you would find out that meant he had been fantasizing about owning your ship for the last 40 minutes. They were also, and I want to be precise here, extraordinarily arrogant, not the casual arrogance of, say, the Droveni, who merely assumed every other species was several evolutionary rungs below them and acted accordingly with a kind of bored condescension. No, the Uran hegemony had a theological framework built around the concept of Vorith, which translated roughly as the correct hierarchy of being. They believed with genuine religious sincerity that the universe had a ladder, and they were at the top of it. Everyone else was furniture. When they first encountered humans approximately 32 cycles ago, they did what they always did with new species. They assessed, they categorized, they assigned a rank on the Vorith scale. Humans received a rank of 7. For context, the Kelvari Dominion received a rank of 12. The Drenthi Collective received a rank of 9. Rocks, as a category, received a rank of 3. So humanity was doing better than rocks, which I am sure was very comforting. The Uran dismissed humans as a minor species. Biologically fragile, technologically moderate, diplomatically naive. They had one interesting trait that the Uran noted in their initial survey report. They seemed to form emotional attachments at a rate and intensity that was, in the words of the Uran xenobiologist assigned to the evaluation, biologically inefficient and culturally destabilizing. Humans loved things. Deeply. Vocally. Often to the point of what the Uran considered absurdity. They loved their families, they loved their friends, they loved their food with a passion that frankly alarmed the first Kelvari diplomatic team assigned to a human colony who once witnessed a human food critic weep openly over something called a properly seasoned brisket. They loved their stories, their music, their little traditions. They named their ships and felt sad when the ships were decommissioned. The Uran found this baffling and a little pathetic. They would later find it catastrophic. The Outer Reach conflict, as historians now call it, started over mining rights. It almost always does, in my experience. 67% of the interstellar conflicts I have cataloged began with someone finding something valuable in a rock and someone else deciding they wanted it. The remaining 33% involved religious disagreements, border disputes, and one very unfortunate incident involving a misdelivered shipment of Trovenian spice paste and a confused admiral. The Darvath Belt was rich in ceravite ore. Ceravite was essential for second-generation jump drives, and in the 32nd cycle, second-generation jump drives were the difference between a fleet that could be somewhere in 3 weeks and a fleet that could be somewhere in 3 hours. The humans had been mining Darvath legally. They had the contracts filed with the Outer Reach Boundary Commission, stamped and verified, boring and entirely legitimate. The Uran hegemony wanted Darvath, so they invented a territorial dispute that did not exist, filed a counterclaim with the same commission, and when the commission ruled in humanity's favor, the Uran simply ignored the ruling. Then they sent warships. This was not technically the smartest decision the Uran ever made, but it was consistent with their worldview. In the Vorith hierarchy, species ranked 7 did not get to own things that species ranked 31 wanted. The universe had a correct order. The commission had gotten confused. The Uran were simply restoring the natural state of affairs. Humanity, for its part, did not immediately explode. This surprised a lot of observers, including me. The human diplomatic response was measured, formal, and patient. They lodged protests. They requested mediation. They sent envoys. The UN intercepted one of those envoy ships, stripped it down for parts, and broadcast the interception on open channels with their chromatic patterns displaying what their xenolinguistics experts later confirmed was the equivalent of a very rude gesture. Humanity filed another formal protest. The UN, emboldened, moved ground forces onto 3 contested mining platforms. And this is where Kale Oren enters the story. Kale Oren was 34 years old by human reckoning. She was a combat medic attached to the 9th Human Auxiliary Response Unit, which had been stationed on Darvath Platform 7 as part of a protective detail for the civilian mining workers who had not yet been evacuated. She was, by all accounts I have reviewed, unremarkable in the way that truly exceptional people often are before the moment that makes them impossible to forget. Medium height for a human female, brown hair kept short for practical reasons, a scar on her left jaw from a pressure seal accident during her first deployment. She had a habit of humming while she worked, and her unit had nicknamed her Hum because of it, which she reportedly found annoying and secretly loved. When the UN ground forces hit Platform 7, they were not expecting resistance. They were expecting furniture. What they got instead was the 9th Human Auxiliary Response Unit, which proceeded to make their lives remarkably unpleasant for 11 hours across 4 decks of industrial mining infrastructure. Kale spent those 11 hours doing what medics do. She moved through firefights to reach the wounded. She stabilized 3 critical injuries under active fire. She pulled a man named Doran Vasic out from under a collapsed bulkhead with nothing but a pry bar and the kind of stubborn refusal to accept reality that I have come to understand is a distinctly human trait. When the platform was finally breached and the remaining personnel were captured, Kale was treating her 7th patient of the engagement. She did not stop working when the UN soldiers entered the room. She looked up at them, confirmed they were not shooting at her, and went back to applying pressure to Vasic's leg wound. The UN commander, a high-ranking officer named Threvok, found this extremely disrespectful. He told her to stop. She said, and I am quoting from the recovered audio log here, "Give me 4 minutes." Threvok found this even more disrespectful. But here is the part that I think reveals everything you need to understand about the UN hegemony. Threvok did not wait 4 minutes. He did not order his soldiers to physically remove her. He did not even escalate the confrontation in any logical tactical direction. He decided to make a point. The UN hegemony had at this time been running a propaganda broadcast network throughout the Outer Reach territories. Live feeds, presented as truth transmissions meant to demonstrate to the watching galaxy that UN dominance in the region was natural, justified, and inevitable. Other species watching were meant to see the UN as powerful and their opponents as weak. Threvok had Kale Oren taken from the medical bay. He had her brought to the platform's main communications hub, where the broadcast equipment was already running. He had the feed opened on every channel the UN network could reach. Then he executed her. Live. In front of every watching eye in the Outer Reach. He intended it as a message, a demonstration of Vorith, a reminder of where species ranked 7 sat on the universal ladder. He was not wrong that it sent a message. He was catastrophically wrong about what message it sent. The broadcast reached human space in approximately 40 minutes. Standard signal delay for that region of the Reach. I have read accounts from humans who were watching the news feeds that day. I have reviewed the psychological impact studies conducted in the years afterward. I have spoken to veterans of what followed, and I want to be honest with you, I do not think I fully understand what happened inside humanity in those 40 minutes, but I can describe the external result with precision. Every human diplomatic mission in every system simultaneously went dark. Every human envoy, every negotiator, every representative who had spent the last 8 months filing protests and requesting mediation and extending olive branches across conference tables, went silent at the same moment. For 6 hours, humanity said nothing at all. The UN hegemony, apparently interpreting this silence as shock or grief or submission, released a follow-up broadcast. Threvok appeared again on screen. His chromatic patterns were displaying what their cultural database coded as triumph. He spoke at length about the Vorith hierarchy and the natural order of the galaxy and the correct relationship between those who led and those who were led. He received no response. The galaxy watched. 6 hours of silence. Then 7, then 8. On the 9th hour, the Human Interstellar Authority released a single document. It was not a declaration of war. Humans have never in any conflict I have catalogued released a formal declaration of war. I find this detail quietly fascinating. They do not announce, they do not posture, they do not release manifestos or ultimatums or lists of demands. What they released was a statement of 3 sentences. I have memorized them. We observed what was done to Kaeloren. We will not forget. We are coming. 3 sentences. No signature, no date. No list of proposed reparations or negotiation conditions or pathways to peaceful resolution. The Uran hegemony, I am told, found this underwhelming. They would not find the next part underwhelming. I want to pause here, before I tell you what happened next, and give you a small piece of context that I think is essential to understanding the full weight of what followed. The Kelveri Dominion has a concept called Verith Solun. It translates imperfectly as the point at which a species reveals its true nature. Every civilization in our philosophical tradition has a Verith Solun, a moment of pressure so complete, so personal, so undeniable, that all the diplomatic language and cultural performance and careful self-presentation burns away, and what remains is the raw, unfiltered truth of what a species actually is. For the Drenthi collective, that moment came during the plague of the 7th moon, when they chose unanimously and without hesitation to quarantine their own leadership rather than their civilian population. It revealed a species that genuinely, structurally, prioritized the many over the powerful. For the Uran hegemony, that moment had already come and gone on Darvith Platform 7. What Threvok did in front of those cameras revealed exactly what the Uran were underneath all the theological framework and diplomatic posturing. They were bullies who had never once in 60 cycles of expansion encountered something that bullied back. The Verith Solun of humanity was still approaching, and I had a front row seat. The first thing humans did was not what anyone expected. Military analysts across a dozen civilizations, including our own Kelveri Strategic Division, had been modeling probable human responses since the broadcast. The consensus was a proportional engagement, an assault on Uran forces currently occupying the Darvith platforms, a rescue and recovery operation combined with enough firepower to make a political statement. Reasonable, measured, predictable. Humanity did none of that. Instead, they pulled back. Every human asset in the outer reach, military and civilian, was recalled. The remaining mining platforms were evacuated in 48 hours with an efficiency that suggested the orders had been prepared well in advance. Human ships withdrew from every contested zone without a single shot fired. The Uran hegemony was baffled. Their strategist interpreted the withdrawal as confirmation of what they had always believed. Species ranked 7 had looked at species ranked 31 and made the rational calculation. The broadcasts intensified. Threvok gave 3 more speeches in 4 days. His chromatic patterns were apparently luminous with self-congratulation. What he did not know, what none of us knew yet, was what was happening on the other side of human space. I pieced this together later from testimony, recovered communications, and the accounts of 3 human officers who agreed to speak with me for this record. The human interstellar authority had not pulled back out of fear. They had pulled back because they were about to do something that required every available asset, every supply line, every logistics chain, and the undivided attention of their entire military apparatus. They were not preparing a battle. They were preparing an answer. There is a human saying that one of my interview subjects quoted to me during our session. She was a logistics commander named Petra Galwan, a compact woman with close-cropped gray hair and the specific kind of stillness that I have noticed in humans who have made very large decisions and fully accepted the consequences. She said, "We don't do warning shots. When we decide to respond, we respond completely." I had heard variations of this sentiment from humans before. I had filed it, intellectually, as cultural bravado, the kind of thing species say to sound formidable. I do not file it as bravado anymore. The human fleet that departed for Uran space 30 days after the broadcast was not large by the standards of the major galactic powers. The Kelveri Dominion alone could have fielded 3 times its tonnage on a standard deployment day. It numbered 41 warships, 14 support vessels, and 6 ships of a classification our intelligence division had never seen before and did not know how to categorize. Those 6 ships were the part that should have worried someone. Nobody worried about them. They were smaller than the warships. They carried no visible weapons arrays on their outer hull. They looked, frankly, boring. They were called, in human military designation, forward consequence units. I will explain what that means in a moment. The Uran hegemony detected the fleet entering their border territories 11 days later. Their response was immediate and confident. They scrambled their own warships, a force roughly double the human fleet in total mass, and arranged them in a standard defensive intercept formation at the edge of the Uran home system. There was a communication exchange. I have the transcripts. The Uran commander, a fleet admiral named Sorveth, opened with a declaration of territorial sovereignty and a demand for the human fleet to stand down. The human fleet commander, a man named Adler Crane, responded with 2 words: "We remember." Sorveth apparently found this cryptic. He sent a follow-up demand. Crane did not respond at all. The human fleet did not attack the Uran warships. This was the second thing nobody expected. They simply flew around them. 41 warships and 20 support vessels reconfigured into a transit formation and navigated past the intercept line like the Uran fleet was traffic on a road they were not interested in taking. Sorveth, confused and then furious, ordered pursuit. And here is where those 6 quiet little ships matter. The 6 forward consequence units broke off from the main fleet. They did not join the engagement with Sorveth's pursuing warships, which the human fleet was now handling with a kind of efficient brutality that I will describe separately. The 6 small ships went directly to the Uran home system. Specifically, they went to the 4 largest Uran military shipyards orbiting the 2nd and 4th planets. Forward consequence units, I eventually learned, were not weapons platforms in the traditional sense. They carried a human-developed technology called a cascade denial system. It had been in development for 11 years, classified at the highest levels of human military research, and had never been used in a live engagement before Darvith. The cascade denial system did not fire projectiles, it did not emit energy weapons. What it did was interface with the power distribution network of any large orbital structure and introduce a recursive feedback loop into the primary generation systems. In practical terms, it meant that within 6 hours of the forward consequence units arriving at the Uran shipyards, all 4 facilities lost power, permanently. Not damaged, not repairable with standard maintenance. The generation cores were fused at a molecular level. The shipyards, the most significant military production infrastructure in the entire Uran hegemony, representing 60 years of construction and enough capacity to build a new warship every 9 days, went dark and stayed dark. No lives lost in the shipyards. The human military had apparently spent considerable effort modeling evacuation windows and timing the deployment accordingly. This was not mercy, I want to be clear. This was precision. Humans, I have learned, are not particularly interested in killing when they can instead remove your ability to threaten them ever again. Dead soldiers can be mourned and mythologized into future wars. Permanently disabled infrastructure is just a very expensive reminder of what happened. While the forward consequence units were conducting their operation, the main human fleet was finishing its engagement with Sorveth's pursuing warships. I reviewed the battle record. It lasted 4 hours and 17 minutes. The Uran fleet outnumbered the humans in tonnage and firepower by a significant margin. They had home field advantage, established defensive positions, and a commander who had won 6 previous engagements in the Outer Reach campaign. Humanity hit them from 3 directions simultaneously using a tactical formation that our own Kelvari analysts later spent 4 months studying and could only describe as aggressively inventive. They targeted propulsion first, not weapons, not shields, propulsion. Every Uran warship that lost propulsion became, in tactical terms, a floating obstacle, and the humans used those obstacles as cover for the next phase of the engagement. By the end of 4 hours, 19 Uran warships had been disabled. 6 had been destroyed. Sorveth's flagship was intact but immobilized, broadcasting a ceasefire request on all available channels. Crane's response again was 2 words. Different ones this time. Too late. The human fleet reformed, collected its own damaged vessels, and continued into the Uran home system. What happened next is the part that the galaxy could not stop talking about for the next 3 years. Crane sent a message directly to the Uran Hegemony High Governance Council. Not a demand, not an ultimatum. He told them in precise and unhurried language what was going to happen. He explained the forward consequence units and what they had already done to the shipyards. He explained that he had 7 more targets identified across Uran territory, all military infrastructure. He explained that his fleet was prepared to continue systematically until every significant military production and logistics facility the Uran hegemony possessed was non-functional. Then he said something that I think will be recorded in history for as long as anyone is keeping records. We are not here to conquer you. We are not here to occupy your space or take your resources or rule over your people. We are here because you executed Kale Orin on live broadcast, and you made the decision to do it in front of the entire watching galaxy. You wanted everyone to see, so now everyone will see this too. He paused. The transmission held open. You ranked us 7. We want you to know what a 7 feels like when it decides you were wrong. The High Governance Council, I am told, sat in complete silence for 11 minutes after the message ended. Their chromatic patterns, observed by the Calvari diplomatic observer present in the chamber, cycled through every color their species was capable of producing before settling unanimously on the pale gray-white shade that in urine culture signified something that had no direct translation but that the observer described in her report as, "The moment you understand you have made an irreversible mistake." The urine hegemony signed the Darvith Accords 22 days later. The terms were written by humans. They were not generous, but they were not cruel. The Urin withdrew from all contested territories. They paid reparations to the families of every person killed in the Outer Reach campaign. They submitted to a 30-cycle demilitarization audit conducted jointly by the Boundary Commission and independent observers from 3 neutral civilizations, and there was one term that had nothing to do with territory or money or military limitation. The Urin hegemony was required to formally revise the Vorith hierarchy, not abolish it. Humans did not demand the Urin abandon their religion. They demanded one specific change. The revised scale could not include any species-based ranking below a threshold value of 10. Rocks could stay at 3, but no living civilization could be ranked lower than 10 by official Urin doctrine. When I first read this term, I laughed. I actually laughed, alone in my research office for a solid 30 seconds, because it was such a precisely human thing to demand. They did not want to destroy the Urin belief system. They did not want worship or submission or acknowledgement of superiority. They wanted the Urin to change one number, one specific, humiliating, philosophically loaded number. They wanted the Urin to admit in their own theological language that humanity was not furniture. The Urin signed it. Thravok was removed from his command 6 months after the Accords. He was tried by a Urin military tribunal, convicted on charges related to the unauthorized broadcast, and sentenced to permanent administrative reassignment to a border monitoring station in the least interesting part of Urin territory. I do not know if this was sufficient. I do not think anyone asked Kale Oren's family whether it was sufficient. I know they were present for the signing of the Accords, and I know the human delegation gave them seats in the front row. I know because I was in that room. I had been granted observer status by both parties. A professional honor that I accepted and then spent most of the ceremony quietly trying not to make eye contact with the Urin council members, who looked like beings who had recently been introduced to consequences for the very first time and were still processing the experience. I watched a woman in the front row, an older human with the same short dark hair and jaw structure as Kale Oren because she was Kale Oren's mother, and her name was Sela Oren. And she sat perfectly still through the entire ceremony with her hands folded in her lap and her eyes clear and dry. Not cold, not empty, just settled. The way a person looks when something that needed to happen has finally happened. When the last signature was placed, someone in the human delegation started clapping. Then everyone in the human section was clapping. Not triumphantly, not mockingly. The way you clap at the end of something long and difficult and necessary. Sela Oren did not clap. She simply stood up, looked at the Urin council table one time, and then walked out of the room. I thought about that for a long time afterward. I have been a war historian for 51 years. I have catalogued conflicts, atrocities, treaties, collapses, and resurrections. I have watched great empires make small mistakes and small civilizations make great stands. I have never, in 51 years, seen anything quite like what humanity did after Darvith. Not because of the military outcome. The military outcome was decisive but not unprecedented. Other civilizations have punched above their weight. Other civilizations have surprised larger powers. What stays with me is the why, the how completely they meant it. They did not go to war for territory, they did not go to war for resources or political leverage or to establish dominance in the Outer Reach. The Darvith Belt mining contracts were included in the Accords almost as an afterthought, 3 paragraphs near the end of a 40-page document. They went to war because someone they loved was killed in front of a camera and the people who did it expected the galaxy to watch and learn the right lesson. Humanity had a different lesson in mind, and here is what I keep returning to late at night, in the records room going over source materials that I have already read 100 times. The Urin called that emotional attachment biologically inefficient and culturally destabilizing. They were right about one thing. It was absolutely destabilizing, just not for humanity. I will close this account with something Petra Galwan said to me at the end of our final interview session. I had asked her whether she thought the response had been proportionate, whether she had any hesitation. She thought about it for a while. The specific stillness I mentioned earlier. Then she said, "Proportionate is a word for negotiations. We weren't negotiating, we were answering." She paused. Then, quieter, more to herself than to me, she said, "Kale used to hum while she worked. Did you know that? Her whole unit called her Hum. I told her I had read that in the file. She nodded, looked at the wall, then looked back at me with something in her face that I do not have a Kelveri word for. The Urin thought that was a weakness, she said. Caring that much about a person, they thought it made us soft. She stood up, which meant the interview was over. It didn't make us soft, she said. It just meant we had a very specific reason. She walked out. I sat there for a long time. I think about that a lot.